Hey guys, LevelCap here. Today we're going to be building a computer, and not just any computer, but a recording computer, a streaming computer, and even an editing computer. It could be all those things. Personally, I'm using it for streaming exclusively, but you can modify it, and I'm going to talk about different ways to modify what I'm doing here. But a lot of people are sort of put off by the whole recording your gameplay, editing your gameplay, streaming your gameplay, because you need a pretty good computer or you need a good streaming PC to stream. A lot of people are getting secondary systems for doing streaming now because you don't want the performance impact on your primary system. And if you're streaming console gameplay, then you have to have a computer that can stream. And you're going to need some pretty decent hardware to do so. You can get by with less hardware than what I'm using today, but I kind of went all out and made just the ideal streaming PC. Now I'm taking the components out of their boxes. That little CPU right there is the i7-3770. Here's some generic Kingston RAM, which I'm holding upside down. Here is a solid state hard drive from Mushkin. Now you can definitely save on cost a bit by going with a platter drive. The reason why I chose a solid state is because some of the older ones are very cheap now. You don't need a lot of space if you're only doing a streaming PC. And they're very quiet. They don't generate a lot of heat or noise, and that's kind of ideal for my work setup. Then I have the PCI AverMedia Live Gamer HD capture card. This is great for capturing game, video, and audio from another computer or even a console system. It doesn't take a lot of CPU power either. Now we have a simple DVD-ROM drive from Lite-On. It's only $17 and you can get away without using a DVD-ROM these days. Install Windows from a flash drive, but for $17 I thought, why the heck not? And last but definitely not least, we have the Shuttle SH67H3 PC barebone system. That is the black case in the background. It has a motherboard and power supply built into it. It's a 300 watt power supply, so it's not going to be powerful enough to run any high-end gaming graphics cards, but for streaming and recording and editing, it's going to be just fine. At any point during this video, if you want to know more about the specific components I use for my build here, you can click on the links in the video description. I have all the components that I put into the PC listed down below. Now I'm removing the cover on the case here, and this case really simplifies building a computer so much more than, say, if you're going to build a gaming computer using your own custom case and motherboard. Just because the motherboard and power supply are already built into the case, the power supply is already plugged into the motherboard, and the motherboard is already connected to the front panel of the case. So you don't have to do any of that wiring. If you're going to build a case, a gaming case where you have to install the motherboard and power supply, you're going to have a little bit more work because you're going to have to actually do a lot more wire connecting inside the case. Now because the case I'm using is so small, it actually has its own special CPU cooler built in. So you'll notice when I actually unbox my CPU, it came with a special fan, which you would normally use for installing it on any normal motherboard. However, this case needs a special CPU cooler that is actually smaller on top so you can fit all the components. Right now I'm just following the manual so that I can remove the CPU cooler so that we can install the CPU. Now for any of you newbies out there, CPU stands for Central Processing Unit. It's the brain of the computer, and if you've bought a CPU that has integrated graphics, you can actually get away without needing a graphics card for a system and still maintaining a pretty beefy system as long as you're not going to be doing any gaming. And that's what I'm doing here. So you'll notice during this build I don't install a graphics card because we don't need one. The CPU takes care of it. Now that the cooler's off, I can open up the bracket that is over the CPU socket, and I can remove the little piece of plastic that is covering the socket there. You have to remove that piece of plastic, otherwise you are not going to have a good contact between the CPU and the heatsink. Right now I'm pointing to the little gold triangle in the corner of the CPU chip. This is a corner that you want to line up with the triangle on the motherboard so that you know the CPU is oriented in the correct direction. You place it on the motherboard and then you turn the bracket down, lock it under the retaining screw there, and you push this bar down so that it holds it in place. After that, you're going to take the little tube of thermal paste and you're going to apply some to the top of the CPU. This is something that you don't generally need to do if you're using the fan that comes with the CPU because it already has some applied to the bottom of the heatsink. However, because we're using this case here and it has its own custom CPU, we need to apply the thermal paste manually. Now the paste that actually came with this case was kind of hard to spread based on previous paste that I've used. Basically, when you're spreading thermal paste on a CPU, you want to cover as much of the top of it as you can with the thinnest layer you can to best facilitate heat transfer. Personally, this thermal paste wasn't that great. It was kind of more gummy than I'm used to. You can buy your own thermal paste and spread it around using like a business card. I was just using the little protective plastic shield. Ultimately, it's not the best thermal paste job I've ever done, but if you're not overclocking, it will be fine. Next, you want to install the heatsink. Make that contact between the copper plate on the bottom of the heatsink and the thermal paste. Install it in location and then tighten the screws. After you have installed the CPU heatsink, making sure to connect the fan back to the motherboard so that the CPU fan has power when you turn it on, we're going to install the RAM. Now, if you're filling up all 4 RAM slots, then it doesn't matter what order you put the RAM in. You just fill up the motherboard. However, if you're only putting in 2 RAM chips like we are here, then you need to refer to your motherboard manual as to what RAM slots to fill up. According to this motherboard, we need to put the RAM chips into the yellow RAM sockets. I bought 8 gigs of RAM simply because I'm not going to be needing any more RAM for rendering or editing or any of that sort of thing. 8 gigs is perfectly fine for streaming applications. Next, you're going to secure the hard drive in the case mounting bracket. You'll notice it already has a little black tray. That's to bring it up to the size that it needs to be for normal cases. Solid states are generally the size they need to be for a laptop installation, so they need an extra bracket so that they'll fit. Then you can put the case mounting bracket in the case and then install the DVD-ROM drive if you've chosen to buy one. Now, if you're trying to save some money on this recording/streaming PC, you could go for a Core i3 CPU, which are significantly less than the Core i7s. You could also go with a platter hard drive, a very cheap couple 100 gig platter hard drive for $50, and save yourself some more money in that department. You could definitely shave off a few $100 from the setup I'm building. After the CD-ROM and hard drive are secure in the case, you can then connect the power cables and the serial ATA cables. Make sure that none of the cables are resting on top of the CPU heatsink, and if possible, depending on your case, try and set them up so that they're not really obstructing airflow. The better airflow in your case, the more cool your components will stay. Next, you want to install the LiveGamer HD capture card. You simply just plug it into one of the PCI slots there and screw the screw on. It doesn't require any sort of external, or rather internal power source cord plugged into the back of it. It's not like a GPU. It's very simple. So once you have that fastened in there, you're pretty much done with the build. And finally, you reattach the outside cover of the case, put in the screws, and then you're ready to plug it into a monitor, get your keyboard and mouse set up, plugged in, and install Windows on the main hard drive. This is a pretty easy procedure. You basically just plug in your Windows, install CD to the CD-ROM drive. You can also do this via USB stick if you know how to set that up. This is possibly one of the easiest computer builds I've ever done, and I think that if you're going to do a computer build for the first time, this wouldn't be a bad way to start, just because you don't have to plug in the motherboard to the case or the power supply and worry about all that stuff. It was a very easy build. While recording it and doing the procedures, it still only took me about an hour to put together the whole computer, and I wasn't really rushing it. I tested the machine for streaming yesterday and it worked like a charm. It makes hardly any sound at all, and you can use it on high compression settings in XSplit to get an excellent picture quality without taking up all your internet bandwidth. So if you're at all serious about streaming and or recording gameplay without having a performance hiccup, I recommend building a secondary recording and streaming PC. This computer will not tax your frame rate at all while streaming or recording. It's absolutely the best way to go if you can afford it. Again, all the components I used to build the computer are going to be linked in the video description if you're at all curious about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is LevelCap, signing off.